Hey everyone, welcome to Simplilearn's YouTube channel. In this tutorial, we will be learning Java projects and Java interview questions. But before we begin, let me tell you guys that we have daily updates on multiple technologies. So if you're a tech geek in a continuous hunt for latest technological trends, then consider getting subscribed to our YouTube channel and don't forget to hit that bell icon to never miss an update from Simplilearn. Now without further ado, let's get started with the agenda for today's session. Followed by the Java projects, we will go through some important Java interview questions. So I hope I made myself clear with the agenda. Now without further ado, let's get started with the Java projects. Over to our experts.
The top 10 Java project ideas. So, the first project that we will deal today is the online career management system. So this particular project motto is to deal with the career management system. The system will be used for day-to-day activities like buy, return, booking, delivery and non-delivery, and self-pickup, etc. It is not easy to build this particular project all alone, as the technicality of the project is a little complex for a single programmer. I would suggest you that you get a team with you and also look out for some automation in the process by developing the relevant software. Robotic process automation is the new normal in today's life. The web-enabled interface allows the user to log in from anywhere in the world and track their career and also view the customer rating. The system is designed to integrate with financial accounting to eliminate duplication of data entry and is also scalable to grow along with your company. The system needs to be built with user-friendly screens, rich in functionality and features, and finally the major part. It should maintain a high level of data integrity. So with that abstract discussed, now let's look into the features offered by this particular online courier service. As discussed in the abstract, this particular project should be providing the features of order and dispatch of the product, information regarding the customer, delivery executive, and followed by the delivery executive, we should be also having a payment window which manages the accounts and bill reports. So having said that, let's now move into the software requirements. So the software used in this particular project is the programming language, that is Java. Database is the Microsoft Access and some convenient RPA tools. And finally the IDE. The IDE for this can be anyone which has a good support for Java. The most preferable one would be the Eclipse. And then comes the IntelliJ, NetBeans and many more. Now creating this kind of a project will give you a valuable experience based on building a fully fledged e-commerce website or an application. I mean, this is how the world's leading applications like Amazon, Flipkart, Zomato, etc. are basically planned and have reached greater heights today. This kind of project on your resume could make a huge difference. And who knows, tomorrow you might even get into one of those companies and start working on their projects or build a company of your own. Followed by the online career system, we have the online voting system. Now thinking apart from getting a job or starting a new company of your own, this is something that we all need today in this pandemic situation especially. In the current scenario, the internet has brought all the ease to our living room. It has replaced physical banking to internet banking, ordering food online, buying movie tickets, buying clothes and household items, to consult your doctor for minor issues, bill payments and many more. Yet, for quite a long time, going to polling booth and standing in a long queue to cast a vote has been persistent, and it has been challenging for the government to motivate common people to participate in the election system and cast their vote, just because there is no other way to do such thing as such an online voting system. But all the credit can be achieved by software engineers who can make it possible soon for everyone to cast their vote to their respective candidate as their own choice with an unmatchable ease. This can be done just by click on their fingers. This is an advanced Java project developed to show online voting functionality. Followed by the abstract, we will get into the technicality of this particular project. So the first phase of this particular project has the admin phase, where the admin has the right to manage the candidates, manage the voters and their profiles and passwords, and finally election results. Followed by the admin, we have the voter or the user of this particular application. The voter or the user gets to register himself or herself into the application. Followed by that, he can use the login and logout options. And next we have the profile and password management. So followed by that, we have the option to choose the positions to vote and finally to cast the vote. Now this particular project is an advanced level Java project developed to show online voting functionality. It showcases the use of Java servlets, HTML and CSS. Again, coming into the IDE. The IDE for this can be anyone who has good support for Java. The most preferable one would be Eclipse and IntelliJ. Followed by the online voting system, we will now continue with the online healthcare management. Named as the Corporate Medicare Management, this e-healthcare management system is a web-based project developed in Java. The main aim of this particular project is to provide effective management of data related to staff and patients in hospitals or clinics. The features offered by this particular project should be as follows. It should optimize bed occupation. The project should improve the use of operation theaters, avoiding the cancellation of operations. To know how much emergencies affect the administration of the hospital departments or services which include cancellation of operations. To optimize the allocation of human and material resources to wards and shifts. To detect the influence of certain diseases in the hospital services, and finally to find clusters of patients. The software requirement for this particular project are as follows. We need DHTML for the front end and Java as the programming language, and data mining tool which is Weka, and Oracle for the database, JavaScript for the scripting language, and finally Tomcat as our server. The e-healthcare management system is a web-based application that assists the management of staff, doctors and patients in an easy, comfortable and effective way. Here, the concept of data mining plays a vital role to develop an effective healthcare management system. The proposed application aims to create a friendly working environment for any healthcare centers to overcome the drawbacks in the existing system of healthcare management. This system is very reliable and flexible from all aspects, so new features and modules can be easily integrated into the system in the future. Followed by the e-healthcare management system, we have a new normal, online banking. Not interesting and arousing for a normal person, but for a hardcore programmer, it is as exciting as a roller coaster ride in an amusement park. Because this is how the major national and multinational banks implement their banking facilities in a wide range so that their customers could experience the ease of banking at their fingertips. One such type of project on your resume could bring major highlight to the recruiter, especially if the recruiter is from a banking or financial based company. Online banking system project is a model internet banking site. This project should enable the customers to perform basic bank transactions by sitting at a corner of their home or office through a phone or laptop. The customers can access bank's website for viewing their account details and perform the transactions on account as per the requirement. Bank employees can log in and add customer and account information to perform transactions with internet banking. With internet banking, the brick and mortar structure of the traditional bank gets converted into a click and portal mode, thereby giving the concept of virtual banking a real shape. Thus, today's banking is no longer confined to branches. E-banking facilities banking transactions by customers round the clock globally. The features you can offer through this particular project are homepage for online banking site, creation of new accounts, login and log out, manage profiles and passwords, view the balance of the account, deposit the amount into the selected account, withdraw amount from the selected account, transfer the amount from one account to another, close the account. So the software requirements for this particular project are Java programming language and JavaScript for scripting language, and Oracle for database, and Tomcat for server. So followed by the online banking project, we have the online examination project. Online exams are normal for us nowadays, but this is totally limited to high-end exams like CET, GRE, CAT, etc. The requirement for this particular project is increasing day by day because of the current scenarios. Many schools and colleges have now turned towards the online education system and are looking forward to hosting online exams for student safety. Online examination is a simple project developed to provide an online platform for faculty and students to conduct online examinations and their evaluations. This particular project has two parts. First is the admin part. Admin has the right to add students, create one-time login, adding questions, receive answers, and finally to evaluate. Followed by the first part, we have the second part, which belongs to the students. So the students can log in, update their profile and password, select answers for the MCQs, write answers to questions, and finally closing the session and log out. This particular project can be made a grand success by making use of simple Java servlets and Java programming languages and server like Apache Tomcat. Followed by the online examinations, we have the Smart City. Smart City Java project can be a web-based software developed to store the details of a particular city. The main purpose of the project is to help tourists and other visitors to a city by providing information about hotels, transportation facilities, air ticket booking, shopping details, city news, etc. The Smart City Java project serves the visitors as a guide of the city, and hence the project is called as City Guide Project in Java. Using this project, the details of the city can be accessed from anywhere at any time. The implementation of this city project promotes tourism and business effectively. Hotels can be searched more easily from anywhere. With the help of this online software, students can look out for academic institutes located in the city. You can view the complete map of the city using this project. Followed by the abstract, we have the features of this particular project. The features offered in this particular project are login, update profile and password, search for the options, select an option like booking a ticket or hotel or anything like transportation, etc. And finally selecting that particular option, booking that option and payment window. Finally, the confirmation of the order. This particular project can be fulfilled by using the following software tools as mentioned below. They are the Java programming language, Tomcat server, scripting languages like JavaScript, etc., and database as Oracle for interactive data storage. This could be escalated to another level by following. Design drones that can act like a cop, act as a tourist guide for the people touring the city, a drone that has capability to take pictures, videos of suspected activities and store it for future reference. A drone can intimidate a cop if any suspected activities are detected. There can be many drones in the city with different functionalities, and finally, you are required to implement the functionality of the drone to the users to interact with the drone. Users could be travelers or cops or travel agents or cab agents. The code for all these projects are provided in the description box below. Followed by the Smart City, we have the bug tracking system. The bug tracking system is a web-based application developed by Java programming language for software companies. The main aim of this project is to manage the errors or bugs that occur during the software development phase and cycle. After the implementation of this project, the employees can update the issue details, solve the issues, and update the system for any location with internet access. Below are the features of this project, and source code of this project is linked in the description box below. Coming into features, the software is applicable in managing the bugs that occur during the development of software and tracking the older issues. It facilitates searching the facility to bug history and solution. The system is fully secured and authentication method is adopted to manage security. It stores the older bug reports so that they can easily be solved when they reappear. The application helps the project manager in evaluating the works of the employees. And finally, the proposed software is capable of auto update when the latest version is available. So the software requirements for this particular project are programming language, which is Java, web-based applications such as JDBC, JNDI, servlets, JSP, and Oracle database or Access database as the database. Followed by that, the server deployment is Red Hat, JBoss, AS, etc. And the client-side scripting as the JavaScript. And the IDE for this particular project would be Eclipse with all the My Eclipse plugins. And finally, the user interface can be designed using HTML and CSS. So with this, we can move ahead into the next project, which is the facial recognition. The face recognition with Opencv is an open source computer vision library that has tons of modules like object detection, face detection, and augmented reality. The major features that this particular project offers are managing the use of faces, facilitate face identification, easy login and logout, store face IDs, identify suspects with just images, enhanced way to find cyber criminals. So followed by the features, now we should look into the software requirements to build this particular project. So the programming language we need for this particular project is Java, and followed by the programming language we need the Apache Ant framework, MingWW64, and finally the CMake framework. So followed by the facial recognition project, we have the next project, which is the vehicle recognition. So Java ANPR is a number plate recognition software which implements algorithmic and mathematical principles from artificial intelligence, machine vision, and neural networks. So the features offered by this particular project are high-level language for numerical computation, interactive environment for iterative exploration, mathematical functions, built-in graphics, functions for integrating MATLAB, and many more. So this particular project can be fulfilled by using Opencv and Java programming language along with some natural language processing algorithms. So followed by vehicle recognition project, we have our last project, which is the speech recognition system. So speech recognizer converts audio to text. Java x.speech.recognition package defines the recognizer interface to build speech recognition plus a set of supporting classes and interfaces. So the features or stages in this particular project are to create a speech recognizer, allocate resources, load and enable grammar, attach result listener, commit changes, and finally provide the process results. So this particular library is readily available in Java, and you can code this project using the Java programming language and an IDE such as Eclipse.
So in this session, we are going to focus on a particular project. And the project we are going to focus is about an ATM application. So you might have interacted with different ATM stores in your cities where you go in, you insert your card, you enter your PIN, and then you can view the balance, you can withdraw some amount, you can also deposit some amount from the ATM. So we will try to look at it from that perspective, and we will see what kind of different Java and OOPS concepts we can use to build such ATM application. This is not a super versatile application, but this is just to give you the idea of how to use those OOPS concepts to build a simple or a complex Java application. So let's start from the options menu class, because that will give us the understanding of what kind of functionality I'm using. And here you will use that I'm using different concepts which I have taught you so far in this particular series. So for example, we are using the IO exception, we are using the hash map class, we are also using a scanner class, which is used to take input from the command line. So this option menu class is extending the account class, and I will come to the account class in a while, but let's see what this option menu class is doing. This particular class has it is using a decimal format money format class, which is to denote what kind of format of money you have. Then we have a hash map, which is storing the couple of records of account number to PIN mapping. So we create a map, and inside the getLogin method, we add couple of entries to the map. Here, the first entry, the first integer, is pointing to the customer number, and the second integer is pointing to the PIN of the account of this particular customer number. So if we call the getLogin method, this method will insert the data. After that, it will ask the customer to enter the customer number, which has to be one of these two. If you provide any other value, then there should be a logic in the application to reject the input. So whatever customer number the customer inputs, we pass that inside this particular method called setCustomerNumber. Again, I will come back to that. And once we have provided a valid customer number, then this method is going to ask you to enter a PIN number. And remember, I told you this is the customer number to the PIN number mapping. So whatever customer number you select from here, you will be providing the corresponding PIN number. And again, if you provide an invalid PIN number, you will get an error. So that will all happen inside this try block. And if you enter any invalid characters in the PIN number or the ATM customer number, then you will get an exception, which I am writing inside the catch block. This is all what we have seen so far. After the successful enter of the customer number and the PIN number, I fetch those values from these two methods. Again, I will talk about what these methods are doing. And again, I'm doing some basic validation checks, but things get interesting in this method. So what we covered so far was the getLogin method. Let me close this method here. So we covered the getLogin method. The second method, which is defined in this particular class, is the account type. So here we will ask once the customer has provided the customer number and the PIN number, we will ask the customer to provide the account type. This application supports two different account types, which are checking account or a savings account. So the customer has to choose one of them. Again, we will be taking the input from the command line using the scanner class. And then I'm using a switch case. If the customer entered 1, then I will execute some code for the checking account, which is defined here in the case 1. And if the customer entered 2, then the case 2 will be executed. And if it enters 3, then I will exit the application by just printing a sys out. So here I'm using the switch case construct to provide different options to the customer. There's also a default case specified here, which says invalid choice. So this is what is happening in the get account type method. The next method is if the customer has used the option 1, then we call the get checking method. So let's go to the get checking method, which is the next method which is defined in this particular class. So if the customer has selected a checking account, then we provide the following functionality to the customer, which is the customer can view the balance, customer can withdraw the funds, customer can deposit the funds to the checking account, or they can just exit the application. And again, I'm using a switch case here. Based on the customer types 1, 2, 3, or 4, the corresponding case block will be executed. For example, if the customer wants to view the balance, then this block will get executed, and I call the get account type method. If the customer selects the 2 as the withdraw fund, then get checkings with withdraw input method gets called, and then get account type gets called. Similarly, if the customer enters 3, then we deposit the fund, and for that also I have defined a method. I will go to the definition of these methods as we go along, but right now we are just building the framework. So the get checking deposit input method will be called whenever the customer selects the option 3, and for option 4 we just exit the application. So this is what is happening in the get checking method. Now, if from the account selection, if the customer selected second option, which was savings account, then we were calling get saving method. So this is where the get saving method is defined. And again, it is following the exact same format as we saw in the get checking method, where we present the following options like viewing balance, withdrawing the funds, and depositing the funds in the savings account. And I have some methods defined here. For example, get saving withdraw input, get saving deposit input. So we define the switch case here based on the customer's choices here. And that is what is happening in the get saving method. So let me close this method as well. And that's all what is defined inside the option menu class. So we ask the customer to enter the customer number, the PIN number from this get login method. Then based on that, we provide the customer the options to choose the account type, whether they can choose the savings account or the checking account. And based on that, whatever account type they use, we call the get checking or get saving method. And inside this method, we provide the customer the other options to either withdraw the money, deposit the money, or view the balance. That is what is happening inside this option menu class. Now let's go to the account class, and all the methods which we saw here will be provided a definition in the account class. You also see this option menu is extending the accounts class, so an inheritance concept is being used here. Let's go to the account class now. So this is the account class where I have defined some private member variables like customer number. So now you will be familiar with the customer number PIN number, which I just described, and also with the checking balance and the savings balance. You can also divide this account class into two child classes, where you have a savings account class and a checking account class. But for simplicity, I've kept it to one class. I'm initializing a scanner input, which will be used at multiple places. And then I have the setters and getters for these four member variables. So you see set customer number, get customer number. If you remember, this set customer number was called in the option menu class. If I go back to the get login, once we ask the customer to enter the customer number, we call the set customer number, which gets called here. Similarly, we call the set PIN number, which gets called here. Similarly, once we have said that, we were fetching the values using the get customer number and the get PIN number. And that is also defined here in terms of the getters, get PIN number and get customer number. Similarly, we also have the getters for the checking balance and the saving balance member variables. We do not have the setters for them because they are not technically setters, but we have to calculate the balance. It's not a simple setter where you can just return the value. So now let's look at some of the business functions of the account class. How do you deposit? How do you view the balance? How do you withdraw the balance, etc. So you see these two methods, which are specifically when the customer is trying to withdraw the money from their account. And these methods are basically called internally by other methods. So we will come to that. Let's just understand that we have two methods for calculating the withdrawable amount or executing the withdraw transaction for the checking account and the savings account. Similarly, I have two more methods here, which are calculating the depositing for the checking account and calculating the depositing for the savings account. And then we get the bigger methods, which are using these calculation methods. So I defined 4 calculation methods so far: calc checking withdraw, calc saving withdraw, calc checking deposit, and calc saving deposit, basically withdrawing and deposit for both of the classes. And then we have these business functions called get checking withdraw input and get saving withdraw input, get checking deposit input, and get saving deposit input. So these getter methods are something which were being called from the option menu class, if you remember. If you go back to the option menu class, and if you chose the checking account, you get these options. And let's say you chose option 2, which was withdraw funds, or option 3, which was deposit funds. Then the corresponding methods which were being called were get checking withdraw input and get checking deposit input. And this is the exact same method, get checking withdraw input and get checking deposit input. So if you see what is happening inside this particular method is a couple of sysouts. Then we take the scanner input amount and we convert that amount to the double. After that, we check if the amount which the customer wants to withdraw is smaller than the checking balance or not. And I'm running this condition to check that. If the amount is smaller than the checking balance, then we call the calc checking withdraw method, which was defined right here. Remember, I told you that these 4 calc methods will be used, and this is how they are used. So here I'm actually subtracting the value. So whatever amount the customer wants to withdraw, subtract that from the main balance and then return the new main balance. That's what you do, right? If you have 1,000 rupees and if you want to withdraw 500, you subtract 500 from 1,000 and then you send back the remaining balance. So that is what is happening when we call this method, and then we print the new checking account balance. That is what is happening in the get checking withdraw input method. Similarly, if you chose option 3, which was depositing funds to the checking account, then get checking deposit input gets called, and it is defined right here, get checking deposit input. And here, instead of subtraction, we are doing the addition. So here I'm again doing a condition check that the current balance plus the new amount which has been supplied by the customer from the command line, the total sum of it should be greater than 0. What if the customer entered an amount minus 5,000? I should not allow that. So that's the reason I'm putting this condition in place. And if the current balance plus the new amount which is supposed to be deposited to the account, the sum of it is greater than 0, then call the calc checking deposit method. And this is where the calc checking deposit method is present, and where I'm just doing present balance plus the new amount and returning the new balance. That's all which is being done here. And you will see exactly similar logic running for the savings account as well. If you look at the get saving withdraw input, which is used to withdraw money from the savings account. So I take the input from the command line and I run a condition check that the amount which the customer wants to withdraw should be less than the current saving account's balance. If yes, then call calc saving withdraw method. which is defined here, where I subtract the amount from the current balance and I return the new balance. And similarly, you will see the exact same functionality in the get saving deposit, where we add the money instead of subtracting the money. And this is all what is defined in the account class. So we talked about the option menu class, we talked about the account class, and now we have the ATM class, which is the entry point, which basically initializes the option menu class and calls the get login method. Remember, get login was the first method which asked you to provide the customer number, and then get login called the method to choose the account type, and the account type methods then called the method to choose the option to withdraw, deposit, or exit. So now we have built a fair understanding of what is happening in this application. So let's run this application. So I just ran this application, and let me bring the console here. It's first asking for a customer number. So I will go to the option menu class and I will pick up one of the customer number which I have hard coded here. So I will provide that customer number and hit enter. Then it asks me for the PIN number. So remember, you have to provide the correct PIN number corresponding to the customer number. So I'm taking this PIN number, just copying it and pasting it here. Then this whole code got executed, and then it called the get account type, and the get account type method provided you with these options, which you see here on the screen. So based on what you select, the case block will get executed. And let's say I want to go for a checking account. So I press 1 and I hit enter. Once you select the checking account, the case 1 gets selected and it calls the get checking method. And the get checking method again provides you with another menu, view, withdraw, or deposit, or exit. So let's say I want to deposit funds. So I press 3 and hit enter. It says the current balance is 0 and enter the amount you want to deposit. Let's say I want to deposit 500 and I hit enter. You get the message saying the new checking account balance is 500 and you have successfully deposited the money. And that is what I did for the checking account. Now let's try to withdraw something from the checking account. So you again get back the same option, because inside the get checking method, we call once we have successfully done the business operation, we again call the account type method to display the menu again to the user. So let's say again select the checking account class, and this time I want to withdraw the funds. Remember, I've added 500 there. So let's say I want to withdraw, so I choose the option 2 as the choice. Current balance is 500 and it's asking me the amount you want to withdraw from the checking account. So I enter, let's say 100, and I hit enter. When I do that, the new checking account balance becomes 400. So the 100 got subtracted from the 500 and the new balance is shown to your screen. You can do exactly the same thing for the savings account as well. And let's also run a negative condition. So I again select the checking account and I want to withdraw the funds. I choose the option 2. Current balance is 400 and I would like to withdraw 1000. What happens? If you do that, we get a message saying balance cannot be negative. And this is coming from the calc checking method, which is defined here. So what is happening that I wanted to withdraw the funds from the checking account, and here get checking withdraw input got called. Here, this condition was checked. So the checking balance was 400 and the amount I wanted to withdraw was 1000. So 400 minus 1000 is not greater than equal to 0. So it jumped into the else block and it said balance cannot be negative. So this is how you can also build some error conditions in your code which are mandatory and which should be built. Otherwise, your application will have a lot of bugs. We can also exit the application. So if you just type 3 and hit enter, you will exit from the application and it will again call the login method, where it will again ask you to enter the customer number. So this is how you can run this application. And this was a simple use case for you to show how you can use the different object-oriented concepts like classes, objects, methods, setters, getters, switch case, etc. to build the application with the correct business logic. And this is all I want to cover in this particular session. And in the next session, we are going to have a look at another interesting core Java project just to build our understanding more better about the core Java concept.
Choose from over 300 in-demand skills and get access to 1,000 plus hours of video content for free. Visit SkillUp by Simplilearn. Click on the link in the description to know more.
Let's get started with walking through a core Java project using all the different OOPS concepts we have learned so far. So in this example, we are going to have a look at a calculator application, and this calculator application supports primarily 4 different operations like addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. So let's see how do we build that app. So in front of me right now is open the main class. So I have a main app class here, which has a public static void main method. And the first thing we see is a read input class, which is calling a read method. So if you go to the read input class, it has a simple static method here, which is the read method, and it is using the scanner class. If you remember, I talked about the scanner class, which is used to take inputs from the command line from the user. So we initialize the scanner class and we start taking the inputs, and whatever the user inputs in terms of the expression, let's say the user entered 4 plus 5 or whatever, that whole expression gets sent back into this input line as a string. And that comes back here in the input expression. Once we have captured the input expression, the next thing we do is divide the input expression in the numbers and the operators. Basically, an expression would be either something like 4 plus 5 into 3 divided by 2, let's say. Let's say the user entered this expression. So this has either numbers or operators. So that's what we are doing here. We are using the split method of the string API, the string class basically. And this split method is going to split the numbers and operators into 2 different string arrays. And here I'm providing the split expression that split at every time you encounter one of these symbols. So this, when you execute this particular statement, it is going to return a numbers array, which will be created based on this expression. So you will get an array with 4, 5, 3, and 2. And similarly, in the operator array, you are going to split or pick out the elements every time you receive a number. So this operator array is going to hold this plus sign, this multiply sign, and this divide sign. Hope you get the understanding that we are just splitting the whole expression into 2 different arrays, where first array is holding only the numbers and no mathematical expressions, and second array is just holding the mathematical operators and no numbers. And we'll see why we need to do that in the upcoming lines. Once I've created this string array, I just want to store or convert these string arrays into a queue. So I convert this array into a list by calling the array.asList. So this expression is going to return a list. And then I'm going to convert this normal list into a linked list, and then going to store this linked list into the queue of numbers. And I'm going to do exactly the same thing for the operator array as well, converting this into a generic list, converting that generic list into a linked list, and then storing this linked list as a queue. So I have an operators queue and I have a numbers queue. Both of them have been stored into a queue now. And then I'm using the poll method. If you remember, the poll method of the queue is used when you want to fetch the first front element, the head element of the queue. So whichever element is sitting at the head of the queue will be taken out the moment you call the poll method. So I fetch the first number from the numbers queue. So in this case, 4 will be fetched here in this variable. And after that, I run a loop on the numbers queue. And I'm going to run this particular loop till this particular queue is not empty. If you see, there's a negation here. So I'm going to pick up numbers one by one from this numbers queue till the number queue becomes empty. And inside the loop, I do the exact same poll operation for the operations queue. So this operations queue is holding all these mathematical operations. like plus, star, and divide. So I'm going to pick the head of it. So in this case, plus will be picked up and will be stored in this variable called OPR. And then I'm going to run a switch case on this OPR. Basically, as I told you, in this particular calculator application, we are supporting 4 operations, which are addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. So I define a case for each of the mathematical expression. So you see there are 4 different cases here. And for each case, I'm initializing a class. If it's a plus sign, then I'm initializing the add class. If it's a minus sign, then I'm initializing the subtract class. For multiplication, I have a class called multiply. And for division, I have a class called divide. Let's have a look at what these classes are containing. So if I go to the add class, first of all, it is implementing an interface called operate. And this operate interface has just a single method called getResults, which is accepting a variable argument array. If you remember, I told you that you can also use a var_arg array. This is called a var_arg expression. This means that these numbers will be an array of arbitrary length. It can be a 1-element array, it can be a 2-element array, it can be a 4-element array, or whatever you supply. But it is still going to be a fixed length array, but the length is going to be dependent upon how much argument you supply to this particular method. So that is what this interface operate is doing. It just has one method declared, which is called getResult, which is accepting an array of numbers. So if the add class is implementing the operate interface, then it has to override the getResult method. And here it is just doing a summation of all the numbers which have been supplied. So if you supply 4 numbers, it is just going to add up those 4 numbers and return the sum. And the exact same kind of logic or similar logic will be seen in other operate classes. So if I go to the subtract class, it runs the exact same operation, but it subtracts the values. If I go to the multiply class, it is also implementing the operate interface, and in the get result, it is just multiplying all the values. Similarly, in the divide class, it is also implementing the operate interface, and it is dividing all the numbers one by one. So it's doing pretty much the same thing in terms of the expression and the logic. The only difference is whether you are using an add operation or a subtract or a multiply or a divide. So we have checked all these classes and the operate interface as well. And let's go back to the main app now. Now you also see that I've defined a reference of operate here, and each of the switch case block, I'm assigning the object type to this interface reference. So I'm using the concept of dynamic binding, which we talked about when we talked about interfaces, that we can also do dynamic binding where we can assign an object to an interface type. And the object type will depend upon the expression. So once we have filled that based on the case, while filtering out this expression and picking up plus, star, and divide sequentially, then we go to the next line outside the switch case block, which is to pick the next number from the queue. Remember, we already did one poll here. So as per this example, 4 was here in this res. And now when we do this number.poll again, 5 will be picked up because that will be the next head of the queue. So we pick up 5 here, and then we call operate.getResult. Now this getResult will be called based on the expression which was encountered first in the queue. Again, looking at the example, the first expression encountered will be plus. So the expression was plus. So the operate type object is of add type. And when you call operate.getResult, the getResult method of add class is going to get invoked, and it is going to sum 4 and 5. This res is holding 4 right now based on what I described here, numbers.poll. And this num is holding the second operand, basically 5 here. So 4 plus 5 gets evaluated here in this case. And then it again goes back here and it checks if the number queue is now empty. No, it is still not empty because we still have 3 and 2 left there. So again, it does the operations.poll and it picks up multiply sign here. Then it again runs the switch case Since it's a multiply sign, it will go here and it will initialize the operate interface reference as the object of multiply class. Then coming here, it will do a numbers.poll. And this time the numbers.poll is going to pick up 3. So 3 will be picked up here. And then the current value of result, which is already 9, 4 plus 5 was 9. The current value of result will be updated here. So res will be 9 here and num will be 3 here. And when you call operate.getResult, the multiply classes getResult will get called and it will say 9 into 3, which will become 27. It will again go back here to this particular line and it will check again if the numbers queue is now empty. No, it is still not empty because we still have one element left. Then it polls the queue of the operations where the expression divide is present there, which is the only element left in this particular operations queue. And since we have the OPR value as divide, this case block gets called and the new divide class gets initialized. The divide class basically gets initialized. And we come here and we do numbers.poll. Now the last number which is available in this queue is 2, which gets picked up here. And then we again call operate.getResult. This time, since the operate operate reference type was of divide class type, so when we call operate.getResult, the divide operation or the getResult method of the divide class, basically this method will get invoked and it will divide the current value of result, which was 4 plus 5, 9 into 3, which was 27. So it is going to divide 27 by 2, which was the last value of the numbers.poll. It is going to execute 27 by 2, and whatever value it gets, it is going to store a value back into the rest variable. And then it is again going to go back here and again going to check the condition if the numbers queue is not empty, but now the numbers queue is empty because 2 was the last element. So it is going to come out of the loop and it is going to print the final result. That is how this whole program is working. Now let's try to see this in action and we'll try to execute the exact same expression. So if I right click and go to run as and run this as Java application, and I supply an expression saying 4 plus 5 star 3 divide 2. And if I now hit enter, I get the value as 13.5, which is exactly what we ran through because 4 plus 5 will be evaluated first, which will result into 9. Then 9 into 3 will be 27 and 27 divided by 2 will be 13.5 exactly. So this is how this whole program is running, where we first take the inputs and then we divide the input into numbers and operation arrays, or in fact queues. And once we have those queues built up, then we pick up the first number and we keep running this loop till the numbers queue is not empty. Inside the while loop, at each step, we pick up the first expression or the operator. We check what is the operator, whether it is an addition, subtraction, multiplication, or division operator. And whatever kind of operator we have, we initialize the corresponding class of it. And then we fetch the next value in the numbers queue. And then we call the getResult based on the expression. And whatever result we get from the getResult, we store it back into the rest variable. So we keep updating the rest variable at every step. So that's the reason the result of 4 plus 5 gets stored in the rest. And next time you are calling the getResult for a multiply operation, here the rest value is 9 now, and it says 9 into 3. Again, in the next time, the rest value will be updated to 27 because we are storing the result back into the result variable. So this is all I want to cover in this particular session, where we looked at an example of a calculator application purely from the console standpoint. Obviously, there can be a lot more stuff which we can do into this particular application, make it more error-free and cover a lot of corner cases like validating the inputs, etc. Also, looking at putting some conditions around the exception handling the divide by zero scenario, etc., which is not here. But this is just to show you the basic idea of how you can build simple to complex CLI applications using the core Java concepts. So in this example, we are going to have a look at a calculator application. And this calculator application supports primarily 4 different operations like addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. So let's see how do we build that app. So in front of me right now is open the main class. So I have a main app class here, which has a public static void main method. And the first thing we see is a read input class, which is calling a read method. So if you go to the read input class, it has a simple static method here, which is the read method, and it is using the scanner class. If you remember, I talked about the scanner class, which is used to take inputs from the command line from the user. So we initialize the scanner class and we start taking the inputs, and whatever the user inputs in terms of the expression, let's say the user entered 4 plus 5 or whatever, that whole expression gets sent back into this input line as a string. And that comes back here in the input expression. Once we have captured the input expression, the next thing we do is divide the input expression in the numbers and the operators. Basically, an expression would be either something like 4 plus 5 into 3 divided by 2, let's say. Let's say the user entered this expression. So this has either numbers or operators. So that's what we are doing here. We are using the split method of the string API, the string class basically. And this split method is going to split the numbers and operators into 2 different string arrays. And here I'm providing the split expression that split at every time you encounter one of these symbols. So this, when you execute this particular statement, it is going to return a numbers array, which will be created based on this expression. So you will get an array with 4, 5, 3, and 2. And similarly, in the operator array, you are going to split or pick out the elements every time you receive a number. So this operator array is going to hold this plus sign, this multiply sign, and this divide sign. Hope you get the understanding that we are just splitting the whole expression into 2 different arrays, where first array is holding only the numbers and no mathematical expressions, and second array is just holding the mathematical operators and no numbers. And we'll see why we need to do that in the upcoming lines. Once I've created this string array, I just want to store or convert these string arrays into a queue. So I convert this array into a list by calling the array.asList. So this expression is going to return a list. And then I'm going to convert this normal list into a linked list, and then going to store this linked list into the queue of numbers. And I'm going to do exactly the same thing for the operator array as well, converting this into a generic list, converting that generic list into a linked list, and then storing this linked list as a queue. So I have an operators queue and I have a numbers queue. Both of them have been stored into a queue now. And then I'm using the poll method. If you remember, the poll method of the queue is used when you want to fetch the first front element, the head element of the queue. So whichever element is sitting at the head of the queue will be taken out the moment you call the poll method. So I fetch the first number from the numbers queue. So in this case, 4 will be fetched here in this variable. And after that, I run a loop on the numbers queue. And I'm going to run this particular loop till this particular queue is not empty. If you see, there's a negation here. So I'm going to pick up numbers one by one from this numbers queue till the number queue becomes empty. And inside the loop, I do this exact same poll operation for the operations queue. So this operations queue is holding all these mathematical operations like plus, star, and divide. So I'm going to pick the head of it. So in this case, plus will be picked up and will be stored in this variable called OPR. And then I'm going to run a switch case on this OPR. Basically, as I told you, in this particular calculator application, we are supporting 4 operations, which are addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. So I define a case for each of the mathematical expression. So you see there are 4 different cases here. And for each case, I'm initializing a class. If it's a plus sign, then I'm initializing the add class. If it's a minus sign, then I'm initializing the subtract class. For multiplication, I have a class called multiply. And for division, I have a class called divide. Let's have a look at what these classes are containing. So if I go to the add class, first of all, it is implementing an interface called operate. And this operate interface has just a single method called getResults, which is accepting a variable argument array. If you remember, I told you that you can also use a var_arg array. This is called a var_arg expression. This means that this numbers will be an array of arbitrary length. It can be a 1-element array, it can be a 2-element array, it can be a 4-element array, or whatever you supply. But it is still going to be a fixed length array, but the length is going to be dependent upon how much argument you supply to this particular method. So that is what this interface operate is doing. It just has one method declared, which is called getResult, which is accepting an array of numbers. So if the add class is implementing the operate interface, then it has to override the getResult method. And here it is just doing a summation of all the numbers which have been supplied. So if you supply 4 numbers, it is just going to add up those 4 numbers and return the sum. And the exact same kind of logic or similar logic will be seen in other operate classes. So if I go to the subtract class, it runs the exact same operation, but it subtracts the values. If I go to the multiply class, it is also implementing the operate interface. And in the get result, it is just multiplying all the values. Similarly, in the divide class, it is also implementing the operate interface, and it is dividing all the numbers one by one. So it's doing pretty much the same thing in terms of the expression and the logic. The only difference is whether you are using an add operation or a subtract or a multiply or a divide. So we have checked all these classes and the operate interface as well. And let's go back to the main app now. Now you also see that I've defined a reference of operate here, and each of the switch case block, I'm assigning the object type to this interface reference. So I'm using the concept of dynamic binding, which we talked about when we talked about interfaces, that we can also do dynamic binding where we can assign an object to an interface type, and the object type will depend upon the expression. So once we have filled that based on the case, while filtering out this expression and picking up plus, star, and divide sequentially, then we go to the next line outside the switch case block, which is to pick the next number from the queue. Remember, we already did one poll here. So as per this example, 4 was here in this res. And now when we do this number.poll again, 5 will be picked up because that will be the next head of the queue. So we pick up 5 here, and then we call operate.getResult. Now this getResult will be called based on the expression which was encountered first in the queue. Again, looking at the example, the first expression encountered will be plus. So the expression was plus. So the operate type object is of add type. And when you call operate.getResult, the getResult method of add class is going to get invoked, and it is going to sum 4 and 5. This res is holding 4 right now based on what I described here, numbers.poll. And this num is holding the second operand, basically 5 here. So 4 plus 5 gets evaluated here in this case. And then it again goes back here and it checks if the number queue is now empty. No, it is still not empty because we still have 3 and 2 left there. So again, it does the operations.poll and it picks up multiply sign here. Then it again runs the switch case. Since it's a multiply sign, it will go here and it will initialize the operate interface reference as the object of multiply class. Then coming here, it will do a numbers.poll. And this time the numbers.poll is going to pick up 3. So 3 will be picked up here. And then the current value of result, which is already 9, 4 plus 5 was 9. The current value of result will be updated here. So res will be 9 here and num will be 3 here. And when you call operate.getResult, the multiply classes getResult will get called and it will say 9 into 3, which will become 27. It will again go back here to this particular line and it will check again if the numbers queue is now empty. No, it is still not empty because we still have one element left. Then it polls the queue of the operations where the expression divide is present there, which is the only element left in this particular operations queue. And since we have the OPR value as divide, this case block gets called and the new divide class gets initialized. The divide class basically gets initialized and we come here and we do numbers.poll. Now the last number which is available in this queue is 2, which gets picked up here. And then we again call operate.getResult. This time, since the operate operate reference type was of divide class type, so when we call operate.getResult, the divide operation or the getResult method of the divide class, basically this method will get invoked, and it will divide the current value of result, which was 4 plus 5, 9 into 3, which was 27. So it is going to divide 27 by 2, which was the last value of the numbers.poll. So it is going to execute 27 by 2, and whatever value it gets, it is going to store the result value back into the rest variable, and then it is again going to go back here and again going to check the condition if the numbers queue is not empty, but now the numbers queue is empty because 2 was the last element. So it is going to come out of the loop and it is going to print the final result. That is how this whole program is working. Now let's try to see this in action, and we'll try to execute the exact same expression. So if I right click and go to run as and run this as Java application, and I supply an expression saying 4 plus 5 star 3 divide 2. And if I now hit enter, I get the value as 13.5, which is exactly what we ran through, because 4 plus 5 will be evaluated first, which will result into 9. Then 9 into 3 will be 27, and 27 divided by 2 will be 13.5 exactly. So this is how this whole program is running, where we first take the inputs and then we divide the input into numbers and operation arrays, or in fact queues. And once we have those queues built up, then we pick up the first number and we keep running this loop till the numbers queue is not empty. Inside the while loop, at each step, we pick up the first expression or the operator. We check what is the operator, whether it is an addition, subtraction, multiplication, or division operator. And whatever kind of operator we have, we initialize the corresponding class of it, and then we fetch the next value in the numbers queue, and then we call the get result based on the expression, and whatever result we get from the get result, we store it back into the rest variable. So we keep updating the rest variable at every step. That's the reason the result of 4 plus 5 gets stored in the rest, and next time you are calling the get result for a multiply operation, here the rest value is 9 now, and it says 9 into 3. Again, in the next time, the rest value will be updated to 27 because we are storing the result back into the result variable. So this is all I want to cover in this particular session, where we looked at an example of a calculator application purely from the console standpoint. Obviously, there can be a lot more stuff which we can do into this particular application, make it more error-free and cover a lot of corner cases like validating the inputs, etc. Also, looking at putting some conditions around the exception handling the divide by zero scenario, etc., which is not here. But this is just to show you the basic idea of how you can build simple to complex CLI applications using the core Java concepts.
Let's get started with Spring Boot and how we can build a simple application using Spring Boot. Before we go further, let's understand why we need Spring Boot. And the basic idea of Spring Boot is to build RESTful web services. If you want to know more about what are RESTful services, please, you can read about the RESTful concept as a concept. What does REST stand for? But the basic idea is that if you are accessing anything over HTTP, then that particular component can be built as a RESTful component. And Spring Boot is the most popular choice for building RESTful web services today. And even in fact, microservices, which you might have heard about. So you can build microservices which also run on HTTPs using Spring Boot. So what I'm showing you right now is the official guide of Spring, which you can use to build an application with Spring Boot. It will list down all the requisites which you need in terms of the JDK installations, Maven, and how to complete this guide, etc., etc. You can again use the same Spring initializer which I talked about in the previous session. You can use this to generate a Spring Boot project for you specifically. So all those options are available here. So I've already done that, and I'm not going to repeat what I just did in the previous session, and will directly jump to an IDE where I have created a sample Spring Boot application. And the structure here, you can see the structure would look very similar with one change, that in the previous example, when we were dealing with MVC, we had an src main resources folder, and that src main resources folder was having all the web components or the HTMLs. But since in RESTful web services, you do not render the HTML, but you just send back the response. The response can be The response body can be pure XML or it can be pure JSON, but you do not send back an view, and that's the main difference between Spring MVC and Spring Boot. That in Spring MVC, you are required to return a view technology. Like in the previous session, we sent a thy_my_leaf template, which is basically an HTML. You can also return a JSP, but with Spring Boot, you do not deal with the view technology. And that's the world we are living in today. When you write Spring Boot, you do not have to worry about how this is going to be rendered on the web page, whether it is going to be rendered using HTML or whatnot. What you need to take care of using Spring Boot is to return the right response body, the exact text of the response, and that's it. So with that in mind, the Spring Boot was born, and the structure, apart from that, the structure would look very similar. There's a pom.xml here, which will provide all the list of jars and dependencies which are required for this particular project. So you can see all the dependencies here, pretty much the similar ones. We have a starter web, we have a starter test, and we have a Spring Boot Maven plugin. And we have an application file, which is the entry point, again having a public static void main method. So you need to put the @Spring Boot application at the top of the class to make it an entry point. If you don't do this, Spring Boot will not run this class, and Spring Boot will even not run your application. So what we are doing as part of this example, that we are just printing all the beans which are provided by Spring. That's all we are doing. Like I said, it's a very lightweight and an introductory session, so we will keep the logics to minimum. And I'm just getting all the bean definitions, sorting the bean definitions, and just printing them one by one. How do you get the bean definition? You get that with this application context class, which is returned when you run the application. And how you run the application is basically using this line where you say Spring application dot run, and you supply application dot class with any command line arguments which you might want to use. Once you do this, it is going to return an application context object to you, and the application context object can be used to get all the bean definitions by calling this method which says get bean definition names. So that's the basic logic which is being run in the main class. Now we also have a controller, but this time it's not a web controller, but it's a REST controller. So you see, in the previous example, we just had written something like this. It was just a pure controller. But here we have become more specific. We are saying that, hey, this is not a simple MVC controller, but this is a Spring Boot controller, or technically a REST controller. So Spring provides a separate annotation for that, which is @REST controller. So you write that particular annotation on the top of the controller class which you are creating, and then you provide a request mapping similar to what we did in Spring MVC. But while you return it, you do not return a view technology. You just return the raw response. Here I'm just returning a string, but you can return a JSON object, you can return an XML object, or whatever you want to, but not a view technology. That's what I'm doing. Like you can see, there's literally nothing I'm doing in this. It's just a simple string return statement which I've printed here. And that's all the code I have right now here. I just have these two classes. Okay, so that was all about what I have written in the project, and now it's time to run the project. So I have just reached to the location inside my terminal where the project's pom.xml was present, and if I just do an ls, you will see that there is a pom.xml available here, and all the code directories are also available here. So now I will just run this application, and to run this application I'm just going to type mvn spring-boot:run and hit enter. Once I do that, the Spring Boot application is going to get started. And let's go back to the controller and actually the main endpoint and see what we were doing there. I did a sysout here which said let's inspect the beans provided by Spring Boot, and then I was printing all the bean names. And if I go back to the output, I will see the same line being written here, which was around let's inspect the beans. So you can see that message which says let's inspect the beans provided by Spring Boot, and then all the beans which are available in the application context are printed here. So that's the basic idea which I want to give you, that you can actually build a Spring Boot application, and you can write your REST controllers, return a string body from it, and once this is run, then you can also run your application from the web browser as well. So let's try to hit that particular URL which I wrote here. So the URL of hello country. So for that, let me just open a new Cognito window, and our application is already running. So if I just say http localhost 8080 slash, I get this message here which says greetings from Spring Boot. And this is the message which we were sending from the REST controller. So this validates our understanding that we can invoke a REST controller, which is a Spring Boot REST controller, via the same method, but this time we are not getting an HTML, but we are just returning this particular string. Now you can use the string in any ways you want, so it depends upon the consumer. So that's all I want to cover as part of the Spring Boot. Now Spring Boot is a huge topic, and we can spend hours and hours talking about Spring Boot, but since this is more of an introductory session, so I just wanted the concept to get introduced, and remember the value proposition of why you would need Spring Boot. The basic idea is to build RESTful web services or build RESTful microservices. That's the basic idea behind using Spring Boot in your applications. And also remember the difference between Spring MVC application and Spring Boot application. Spring MVC is for building web application. Spring Boot is for building RESTful applications, which might not have a web interface integrated with them at that moment.
Let's get started with our demo of a project which is using Spring Boot to build a RESTful web service. So a RESTful web service is nothing but any endpoint which you can access or you can consume the data from via an HTTP layer or via a simply a web layer, because most of the web traffic which we deal with is built on HTTP. So to take an example, if you go to any website where you sometimes see on the top right corner, you see today's weather. So how is that today's weather coming in? It's coming in via a REST web service. The website which you are accessing is basically hitting an HTTP endpoint, which is where the weather application is sitting, and it asks for the weather data, and the REST web application just returns the data, and that's how the website is able to show you the current weather. So RESTful web services are everywhere, and they are the most popular way to build applications today, where you just build your RESTful web service and you expose an HTTP URL. And then the consumers need to just access that HTTP URL to consume the data from your application. And you see, this makes it very easy because there is no data type restrictions. There is no tight coupling here. It's just an HTTP endpoint. So that's the basic idea. And we will look at a project where we will be using Spring Boot to build a RESTful web service. And then we will try to run that web service to save some data and also to return some data. So here on the package explorer, you see I have created a project called REST service. And let's just walk through the structure of it, and then we'll go into the details of it. So we have an src main Java where I have a package and I have a bunch of classes here. And before we go to the classes, let's first also access the dependency file, because every project needs some dependencies, some jars to execute it. For example, Spring itself is basically a jar. So you need to include the Spring jar in your project so that your project can become a Spring project. And there are generally two dependency tools. One is Maven and one is Gradle. In this particular project, I am using Maven dependency tool for downloading and managing the dependencies which are needed to run this project successfully. And the way you will find if it's a Maven project or if it's a Gradle project, for a Maven project, you will see a file called pom.xml. And if it's a Gradle project, you will see a .gradle file. That's how you can spot whether the project is using Maven for dependency management or it is using Gradle for dependency management. So let's open the pom.xml. Since it's an XML file, it will be a bit verbose, but if you just read it piece by piece, it will become easier to understand. First of all, since this is a Spring project, I need to include the parent dependency, which brings a lot of good defaults, sensible defaults from Spring Boot automatically. And this is the jar name. This is the artifact ID, which is Spring Boot starter parent. So any Spring Boot project you are starting, do include this parent. This parent is basically bringing all the dependencies from some other jar, and you can make your project as a child of this particular parent. So all the Spring Boot projects have this as a parent as a standard practice. After that, you provide your own details in terms of what is the package name, how do you want to see the jar name, and what is the jar actual name, what is the jar version, etc., etc. You also set the minimum required Java version to run this application. And then you, in the dependency sections, you provide all the jars which you need to run your project successfully, both compile and run your project successfully. So we added the Spring Boot starter web dependency, which basically brings all the dependencies around making a controller or making a repository, context component scan, all the interesting features which Spring provides get wrapped up inside the Spring Boot Starter jar. And you can actually go to the MVN repository and have a look at what all classes it provides. It's a lot of classes. So I'm just telling you in a brief that it provides all the RESTful functionality. Then you have the next dependency as Spring Boot Starter Data JPA, which is going to enable this project to also have a database. And if it has a database, then you need Java to talk to the database. And the way Spring suggests to talk to the database is via using the Spring Boot Data JPA library. We will see this how this library can be used, but basically this provides ways to represent your Java object in the database. And then you need to also add the actual dependency of the database. And in this case, we are using an in-memory H2 database. So I'm not using an external database like MySQL or Oracle or PostgreSQL, because that will just make more configurations more complicated. I just wanted to keep it simple. And generally, you in this H2 database, you can easily access by adding this dependency, and it will be an in-memory database created for you. Then I've also added Spring Boot Starter test here, which will be used whenever you are writing unit tests, and you must write unit test for your project. And then we need to add the plugin so that Spring Boot can run this project. That's all I have in the pom.xml. Now let's move to the interesting part, the Java section part. Let's start from the main class. So this is how the main class looks like, where you just create any name with the class, and then you add a public static void main method. Inside the public static void main method, you call Spring application dot run. And this run method is basically going to run your application, and you just provide the same class name which you just wrote here. So you just say dot class. And if you're supplying any command line arguments, it can interpret that command line arguments as well if you want. So you'd always need an entry point in an application, and this is the entry point which Spring Boot supports. And this is, if you see this code, this is just normal code. To make Spring be aware about this class being treated as an entry point, you need to add @Spring Boot application annotation on top of the class. This is one of the annotation which is coming directly from the Spring Boot library. You can see this import. So once you add this, then only Spring will be able to treat this class as an entry point. Otherwise, Spring doesn't know where to start from. So when you run Spring, it will try to find a class with an annotation Spring Boot application. And then inside the class, it will try to find a public static void main method. And once it has found both of them, then it will just run the application. So it's very simple, nothing fancy here. And what we are dealing with here is a student object. So we will try to insert a student object, and we will try to retrieve the student object. So if you ignore these annotations which I've added, it's just a pure POJO. It's just a plain old Java object. You create a student class. Let's ignore this field as well for now. I'll just come back to this annotation in this field. But this is just a student class. It has 3 fields as name, age, and address, an empty constructor and a parameterized constructor, and some getters. Intentionally, I have removed the setters because generally, whenever you are building any enterprise grade application, you would like to keep your objects immutable. Means once they have been created, you would not like somebody to allow to change the values of the object. This just makes programming much more easy if you treat all the objects in your application as immutable. That's why I have not added setters here. It's just considered a good practice. So apart from the standard things which we have already seen, there are 2 things here which I want to talk about. Let's first talk about this one. So @entity is the annotation which is coming from JavaX persistence entity. And this makes Spring Boot save this particular object into the database. This is the annotation which you need to put on your class so that Spring Boot knows that this class represents a table in the database. So you need to add this to make sure that this represents a table. Second thing, a table will have a ID. It will have sort of a primary key. So I've created a new column called ID, which is basically representing the student's roll number or something, or maybe a registration number. And here I'm using a couple of more annotations. If you see, these annotations are also coming from JavaX persistence library. And these annotations will basically allow a new ID to be created every time you create a student object. So you don't have to specify the value of this ID variable. Spring Boot will automatically generate a new ID value every time you create a new student object. And how does it generate? You can provide the generation type as well. So currently I've just set it as automatic, but you can set it as identity, sequence, or controlled by table. You can also see the explanation of each of these here. But I've just kept it as auto, which basically let the persistence provider pick any appropriate strategy for the particular database. In our case, the database is H2. So that's about the entity class. Let's call this as entity class. Now let's move to the repository. So you need a repository class. Like I explained in that three-tier architecture, you always need a DAO layer or a repository layer to store your student object into the database. So we have enabled the student object to be saved, but we need a handler which can save this particular file, this particular object into the database. And the repository classes are the classes which will allow you to do that. So you create a very simple interface. You name whatever you want to name your interface as, and then you say extends JPA repository, the type of the object, and the unique identifier of the object. So the type of the object is student here, and the unique identifier of the student object is the ID, which is of type long. So you need to just supply the types, type of the object, type of the primary key, or the type of the unique identifier. And this annotation is coming from Spring Boot. You can see specifically Spring Boot data library, which we added. So you just need to create an interface, extend it from JPA repository, and make sure that you add this annotation as well. Spring heavily uses the concept of annotations, and this will help Spring understand that this is a repository layer class, and it will apply some more metadata to this class while this class is running in the JVM. So what happens here? You just created an interface. You did not provide any method to create or any method to delete or any method to get a student object, because all of that is automatically provided by Spring Boot via the JPA repository class. If we go inside this class, and if you scroll down, you'll see the find all method, find all by ID, save all, flush, save and flush, delete, etc. And if you go further up, this also extends the paging and sorting repository, which provides pagination and sorting facilities. But the interesting one is that paging and sorting repository again extends a CRUD repository. And if you go to the CRUD repository, you will find all the basic methods to save an entity, save multiple entities, find an entity by the ID. That's why it needed that long type to make sure that it can execute this method. You can check the existence of an object, find all the entries, find all by ID, count them, delete them. So all the basic CRUD functionality. So we call them as CRUD because the reason it is called CRUD because create, read, update, delete. That's basically the generic acronym. So because this CRUD repository provides all the methods and their implementations automatically, we do not need to write any code at all. So that's why Spring Boot is so awesome, and that's why Spring Boot is very popular, because it's zero code in the repository and you still get all the CRUD functionality. So that's about repository. Now we have covered the entity class, we have covered the repository class, we have covered the entry point class. Now the only thing which is remaining is the endpoint, the HTTP endpoint, which I talked about. And that you can create by creating any class. Generally try to suffix it with the controller so that your core developers can easily find this class, and make sure that you put @REST controller annotation on top of it. This annotation will allow Spring to treat this particular class as an endpoint class. Then you can auto-wire the student repository. So if you remember, I talked about the whole dependency injection and inversion of control. So here dependency injection is in action. So here you're just telling student controller to auto-wire the student repository. And now what will happen that at runtime, student controller, or actually Spring, will automatically create an object of the student repository and supply that object of student repository to student controller. So you as developer do not have to create an object of student repository explicitly. That's the benefit, and that's how the dependency injection is working, because you inverted the dependencies now. The dependency is just injected into the class, and as a developer, you don't have to take control of creating the objects. It's the Spring which will automatically read the auto-word annotation and will automatically supply an object whenever it is required. Then I have two methods here. Since we are talking about HTTP endpoints, so I have represented a post method here and a get method here. The way you will write a post method is via @post mapping annotation, and then you can provide the URL path on which somebody should call your endpoint to save something. So for example, somebody can call it HTTP localhost 8080/student/create. Whenever they hit that URL, the control or that request will directly hit this particular method. Why? Because you have provided the URL mapping here in the post mapping annotation. So since it's a post method, there would be request body. what is the actual request body which the client is sending, and you can represent that request body with the @request body annotation, and you can provide the type of the request body. And here I'm saying that, hey, if you want to access this particular URL, yes, all good, but you need to supply me with a text representation of the student object or a JSON representation of the student object. And then inside the method, I'm calling student repository dot save, which is going to save the student object which is coming in. So you see there's a lot going on here. I will show you how the student is represented in the request body as well, and then I will come back to how it got converted from JSON to Java. But this is how you can store this particular student object. You can hit this API as many times as you want and keep inserting a new student object every time. Then if you want to fetch a particular student, then you can do that by supplying the /student. And then in the curly braces, there's an ID written here. So basically you can supply the value of the ID of the student. So generally there would be another method here, which would be find all, to see all the students and with their ID, and then you can pick a particular student's ID, supply that student ID value here dynamically. That's why the curly braces supports dynamic value. So here it can insert 1, 2, 3, or whatever the student ID you want to fetch the value for. You provide that value in the student /ID, and all good. Then if somebody is hitting the URL with saying localhost 8080/student/1, then student with the ID 1 will be returned from the request. And you need to put @get mapping to make sure that this method is treated as an HTTP get method. And you can provide the type, you can say get student, and here this dynamic value is captured with the @path variable, because you need to know the ID, right? Whatever ID somebody has supplied it in the URL, you need to capture that IDE and then use that IDE for calling the repository. So you can do that by using the @path variable. So here I'm just saying whatever ID is coming in, I will store that value inside this IDE. Once I've done that, then I can again call student repository dot find by ID, which is again a built-in method provided to me by the CRUD repository. I can supply the ID, and this actually is going to return an optional object, which is an object which may or may not contain a value. So it's just a defensive programming style. So this will return an optional, and you can call a get method to return the actual student object. This will return an optional of student. So optional of student means that this optional object may have a student or may not have a student. Why did Spring do that? Because the ID somebody is supplying, that ID can be invalid also, right? So optional object takes care of that if there is no student found, then you will not get a null pointer exception. And if there's a student found, you can return that. So it's just a defensive programming style which Spring has adopted by returning an optional of the student object rather than directly the student object. But if you're confident that this particular optional of student object does contain a student object, then just call optional.get, which I've called here, which will return the actual student object sitting inside the optional object. You can read more about the optional object and its usage from the official Java docs, and there are tons of examples available on it on internet. So this is about the controller. We have covered all the classes. Now it's time to run the application. So you go to the command prompt, you go to the particular file folder location, and there you just say mvn spring-boot:run. So I just hit enter, and this is going to run the application. It's going to spit some logs here, and if everything is fine, you will not get an error, and you will just be getting a message saying that application got started. And it's running on Tomcat localhost 8080 with no context URL. So this is not a web application. This is a RESTful web service, right? This is a RESTful service. This is not a web application. So there is no web interface. So how do you access this? You just have an HTTP URL. So you can use any of the REST client available on the internet. There are probably hundreds of different REST clients available on the internet. You can choose any one of them. I am using advanced REST client, which you can also install as an extension from the Chrome browser itself. So if I just open the Chrome browser and I just say REST client, if you just write this and hit enter, you will get many different options. And the first option you get is from Google Play Store's App Store. So you can go to the App Store, basically the Chrome Web Store, not the Play Store, but the Chrome Web Store, and you can just install this. Since this is already installed, you can click on Launch App, and it will open this interface for you. So this is this is not a tutorial for advanced REST client, so I'll just be quick here. You can choose the method type which you want to hit. So let's say I want to do a post. and then you can provide the URL here. So remember the URL which we put here in the controller method, this has to exactly match. So HTTP localhost/student/create should be the URL. So let me just copy paste this one here. Okay, so the URL is good here. It's a post type of method which I want to do, and I want to hit this particular URL. Now I need to supply the content type and the body. So in the content type, you can choose application JSON because I'm going to supply a JSON object. And in the body, this is how the JSON object looks like. Advanced REST client also provides a nice visual interface to basically create this JSON. If you are thinking that JSON creation is very tough, it's not actually tough. It's just curly braces. And then you put key and value, comma, let me just put an enter here so that it's more readable. So you just put curly braces starting and end, and then you just put key value. You put a key, which is the variable name and the variable's value, variable name, variable value. And these keys have to exactly match the student's properties. So the student.java had this name, age, and address, right? So it has to exactly match. Otherwise, this request will fail. So this is all good. Now I can send this particular request. When you click send, it is going to hit my Spring Boot application, which is running on localhost 8080. It is going to call the student/create method. It is also going to convert this JSON into a Java object because here I'm supplying a Java object. So it will convert the JSON, which I'm sending from here, to Java object automatically, and it is going to automatically save it here because I've called the repository.save method. So let's hit send here. Once I hit send, I get a 200 OK. It means everything went fine. And in the response header, I get the object back because I have returned the object here. You see, this save method is going to return the same student object which you created. So everything is good here. My object has been stored here. And now it's time to fetch the object. So it has already been saved into the H2 in-memory database, and you can obviously go and connect to the in-memory H2 database and have a look at it. But for simplicity, I'm just going to do this here. And let's say the first object is generally added as the ID1 by default by the H2 database. So let's hit this particular URL. When I hit this URL, it is going to hit the student controller here. And in the student controller, it is going to hit the getStudent method, which is having a student/ID URL. And it is going to find the database with that ID. And if it finds a student object with that ID, it is going to return that. So let's confirm that now. So let's hit this particular send button, and it is going to hit a get request with this particular URL. Spring Boot is going to find if a student with the ID 1 exists in its database. So once I hit send, I get a 200 OK. And you see in the response headers, I get the same student object back, which I added. Let's try with 2 now. Let's see what happens. I see 2 and I get 500 internal server error because there is no object stored in the H2 database of the Spring application with the ID 2 yet, because we only inserted one object. That's why only one student object is there, and the first ID which H2 database created for it automatically was 1. So when you hit for get request with a student ID 1, you get the object. When you put any invalid value and you hit this, you get a 500 internal server error. You can also make it look nice by not sending the 500 internal server error and sending a nice exception from the backend. So from here, you can also send a nice exception that if this object is not found, you can say something like that or else throw, which is again an optional object. And here you can supply a particular type of exception which you want to supply instead of just throwing 500 internal server error. But that's just additional defensive programming you can do. You can add more and more validations and constraints into this project as you build this project in a more complex paradigm. So this is basically what I wanted to show you, that we have created a Spring Boot application. We have connected it to a database. We have created also an HTTP endpoint with student controller. We ran that application. We used any random REST client. In my case, I used advanced REST client. And we first did a post request. We provided the exact URL. The URL has to exactly match with the controller URL. And then the body, the request body also has to exactly match with the student object's property, especially the case of the names have to exactly match. So if all this matches, then you will get a response back that the object has been created. If you want to fetch the value of the object, you're going to use the HTTP get method, and you again provide a URL which has to exactly match to some method in some controller in the Spring Boot application, which is running on localhost. And if you provide the right ID, you are going to get a valid result. If you provide an invalid ID, you're going to get a 500 internal server error. And from here on, you can make this controller as robust and as mature as you want. You can add find all method. You can add a update student method. You can add a delete student method. You can have all different kinds of filters. Like, for example, return to me all the students starting with the name A, or return all the first students with the roll number 1 and 100, or between 1 and 100. So you can write as many endpoints as you want and build this application in with as much maturity and as much complexity as you want.
We all know that Java is one of the most sought programming languages in the current IT industry. There are multiple multi-million-dollar companies which are using Java till today. So this video is completely dedicated to help out the Java developers and the beginners in Java programming language to crack the most frequently asked Java interview questions. So without further ado, let's begin with our interview questions. At first, we will start with the beginner level interview questions. So in the beginner level interview questions, the first question we have is, what is JIT? So the answer for this question is, JIT is an abbreviation for Java In-Time Compiler. It increases efficiency of the interpreter by compiling the bytecode in the runtime. JIT, or Just-in-Time Compiler, compiles code to machine level directly for higher speeds of code execution. So basically, just-in-time compilation is a feature added to the interpreter of Java. So this involves conversion of the code directly to machine level during the compilation stage. This improvises the speed of execution of a Java program. Now, after the first question, the second question in the docket is, what is a class loader? Now let's discuss the answer for this particular question. So basically, class loader is the first file to load when you execute any Java program. So the Java class loader is the integrated part of Java virtual machine. So the functionality of class loader is to load the class to the Java virtual machine while it is demanded to execute a class. Java has Bootstrap extension and application type of class loaders. So the third question in the docket is, what are the memory allocations available in Java? So the answer for this particular question is, Java provides multiple types of memory allocations, but the 5 major types of memory allocations which are most frequently used are class memory, heap memory, stack memory, program counter memory, native method stack memory. So the next question in the list is, will the program run if I write static public void main? So basically we write public static void main, but in case, imagine if I write the program as static public void main, will the program execute properly? So the answer for this question is yes, because Java does not follow any specific rule for the order of specifiers you place in your program. So when you execute the program with such pattern in your specifiers, then the program will compile successfully. Also, it will run successfully. So the next question we have is, what is the default value stored in local variables? So in C programming language, when you declare a local variable or a global variable or any type of variable, then the first value which is stored inside that variable will be a garbage value, unless you initialize the variable with a personalized value. For example, if you declare a variable I equal to 0, then you are storing a value in that variable I, that is 0. If you just declare it as int I, then the value stored inside that I variable will be a garbage value. So similarly, when you declare some kind of local variable in Java, then what will be the default value stored inside it? So the answer for this question is neither the local variables or the global variables or any primitives or any object references do not have any kind of default value stored in them. So followed by the fifth question, we have the sixth question. So what would be the output of the following code segment is the sixth question. So this might happen sometimes. So basically what happens is your interviewer will throw a question at you which has a code segment. So all you need to do is decode that code in your mind and provide the output. So this would be the code that we will be dealing with. So you can see our question has two printf statements. The first one has 100 plus 100 plus a string, which is Simplilearn. And in the second printf statement, we have a string that is e-learning company plus 100 plus 100. So what will be the output of these two printf statements? So the answer for this question is really simple. So we'll be having 200 Simplilearn as the first output and e-learning company 100 as the second output. Why? Let's check out the code segment once again. So when you see the code segment once again, so the first printf statement has 100 plus Simplilearn. So JVM here understands 100 as an integer value and the plus symbol as an addition operator here. So followed by the addition operator, we have another integer value. So what JVM does is it adds the two numbers 100 plus 100. So followed by that we have another plus symbol here. So followed by the plus symbol we have a string value. So here the JVM considers the plus symbol as a concatenating operator but not as an addition operator. So that's why the first two numbers got added and the result was 200 and the next two values were concatenated. So it became as 200 Simplilearn. Similarly, in the second printf statement, the JVM encountered with a string value. So it considered the plus symbol as a concatenating operator. Similarly, it happened with the second plus symbol as well. So that's the reason we had e-learning 100 as the second output. Now followed by the sixth question, we have the seventh question. What is an association? So the answer for this question is an association can be defined as a relationship that has no ownership over the other. So to understand this definition, we can consider a simple example. Consider a person associated with multiple banks. So consider person X who has got accounts in bank A, bank B and bank C. And similarly, a bank is associated with person X. That is, a bank A, bank B and bank C are associated with the person X. But no one has ownership over the other. A person X who is an account holder with all the three banks, that is A, B and C, does not possess any kind of ownership over the three banks. Similarly, banks A, B and C who has the customer, which is the person X, but the banks do not possess any kind of ownership over the customer. So the relationship between the person X and the banks A, B, C can be considered as an association. Now followed by the seventh question, we have the next question, that is the eighth question. Define copy constructor in Java. So the answer for this question is as follows. A copy constructor in Java is a constructor that initializes an object through another object of the same class. A copy constructor in Java is really helpful because when you want to copy a complex object that has several fields, or when we want to make a deep copy of an existing object, then the copy constructor is the one which will help you out in this situation. So followed by the eighth question, we have the ninth question. What is a marker interface? So the answer for this question is an empty interface in Java is referred as a marker interface. Serializable and clonable are some of the popular examples of marker interface. So basically a marker interface is just another interface, but normally in interface we provide some signatures. So these signatures belong to particular methods. So in normal interface we just have method signatures but not the complete implementation, or at least we'll be having some variables. But in a marker interface we do not have any kind of data manipulating method signatures, any data members, nothing. They have special functionality unlike a normal interface. So followed by the ninth question, we have the 10th question. What is object cloning? I guess the word object cloning is completely self-explanatory. Yet the answer for this question is, it is an ability to recreate an object completely similar to the existing object. This process is known as object cloning in Java. Java provides a built-in function or method, that is the clone method, to clone an existing object, offering the same functionality that of the original object. So followed by the 10th question, we have our 11th question. Why is Java not completely object-oriented? So this question might be a little confusing, but it's true. Java is not completely object-oriented. But what's the reason? Yes, I'll explain you why Java is not completely object-oriented. So the answer for this question is, Java is not considered as 100% object-oriented programming language because of the data types it uses. It still makes use of 8 or more primitive data types, which are int, float, double, and few others. So this is the only reason why Java is not considered as completely 100% object-oriented programming language. So the next question is, define wrapper classes in Java. So the answer for this question is, in Java, when you declare primitive data types, that is the int, float, double, etc., then the wrapper classes are responsible for converting them into objects or reference types. Just as we discussed before, Java is not 100% object-oriented programming language just because of the primitive data types it uses. So when you include such primitive data types, then wrapper classes are the ones which convert them into objects or reference types for the ease of compilation and execution of programs without any issues. So followed by this question, we have the next question. Define singleton classes in Java. So the answer for this question is, in Java, when you make the constructor of a class as private, then the particular class can generate only one single object. This is the reason why such type of classes are called as singleton classes. So followed by that, we have our next question that says, define package in Java. So if you use some of the popular IDEs, that is the integrated development enterprises such as IntelliJ or Eclipse, then you might be familiar with projects, packages, source files, and then the class file. So basically you create a project first, and inside the project you will be having your source folder, and then you will be creating your own package using the source folder, and inside the package you will create a class file, and inside the class file is where you write your Java program. So here the question is, define package in Java. So the answer for this question is as follows. Package is a collective bundle of classes and interfaces along with necessary libraries and jar files. The use of packages helps in code reusability. So basically when you create a specific package, inside that package you will store all the class files that you will be using in your Java program. So not only class files, in case if you use any kind of connectors or any kind of jar files or any kind of dependencies for your Java program, you will include all those inside the package so that the requirements and the class files are bundled together, and this helps out in code reusability, making sure that the program files or the jar files or any dependencies are not juggling between one package to the other or one file to the other. So using a package is basically a good practice. So followed by this, we have our next question. Can you implement pointers in Java program? So if you remember C programming language, we had pointers there. So we use pointers to directly access the memory. So similarly, can you use pointers in a Java program? This is a little tricky question for beginners, but basically it's really simple. Now the answer for this question is no, because Java Virtual Machine personally takes care of memory management implicitly. So Java's major motto was to keep programming simple. So accessing memory directly through pointers is not a recommended action. So the answer is a big no, you cannot implement pointers in Java program. So followed by that, we have our next question. Differentiate between instance and local variables. So the answer for this question is really simple. Instance variables are declared inside a class and the scope is limited to only a specific object inside which an instance variable is created. So followed by the instance variable, we have the local variable. So the local variable can be anywhere inside a method or a specific block of code. Also, the scope is limited to the block of code where the variable, that is the local variable, is declared. Now followed by the 16th question, we have our next question. Explain Java string pool. So the answer for this question is a collection of strings in Java's heap memory is referred as Java's string pool. So for example, you wanted to create a new string. Consider your name. So your name might be some XYZ. So if you wanted to create XYZ string, then you provide that particular code to your JVM. So what does JVM do? It will not directly create that particular string. First, it will search for the XYZ string in your string pool. If that is already existing in your string pool, then it will provide a reference to that particular string. In case if XYZ is not there, then the JVM will create a new string, that is the XYZ string. So followed by this, we have our next question, that is, what is an exception? So the answer for this question is, an exception in Java is considered as an unexpected event that can disrupt the normal flow of the program. So for example, just consider that you are going to write a program for division operator. So after you finish your program, your evaluator might want to test your code to the extreme levels. So instead of providing a proper number, imagine that your evaluator is providing a wrong input, such as special symbols, sometimes 0 or any other sort of input. So if this kind of input is provided to your program, then your program might crash. So you can avoid this kind of crash by using exception handling. So basically you can use try and catch blocks. So you can embed your code inside the try block and say to your program that if any kind of wrong input such as special symbol or 0 is provided by the evaluator, then send a message saying wrong input or divide by 0 exception. So this kind of approach will provide an output, but this kind of approach will avoid your program from crashing. So this is how exceptions are handled in real time. So followed by this, we have our next question. What is final keyword in Java? So the answer for this question is, the term final is a predefined word in Java that is used while declaring values to variables. When a value is declared using the final keyword, then that particular value of that particular variable will remain constant throughout the execution of program. So sometimes if you include a normal variable and provide an operation on that particular variable, then the value of that particular variable will change after the execution of program. But when you declare the same variable using final keyword, then no number of operations or any kind of manipulations applied onto that variable will not change the value of that particular variable. So that's the speciality of final keyword in Java. So followed by that, we'll dive into the next question, that is, what happens when the main method is not declared as static? So the answer for this question is, when the main method is not declared as static, then the program may be compiled perfectly, but ends up with a serious ambiguity and throws a runtime error that says no such method error. So when you basically declare a main method, don't forget to specify the static keyword. So with this, we finish the beginners segment of questions. Followed by the beginners segment, we have the next segment, that is the intermediate level segment. So the first question in the intermediate level is, what is JDK, and mention the variants of JDK. So the answer for this question is, so JDK is basically an abbreviation for Java Development Kit. This is a combined package of JRE, that is the Java Runtime Environment, and developer tools used for designing Java applications and applets. Oracle has the following variants for Java Development Kit. So the first one is the JDK Standard Edition, which is normally used by beginners and intermediate developers. Next, after the JDK Standard Edition, we have the Java Development Kit for Enterprise. So this particular Enterprise Edition is used by professional Java developers for developing Java-based applications and frameworks. Now the last one is the Java Development Kit Micro Edition. Now followed by 21st question, we will dive into the next question that says brief access specifiers and types of access specifiers in Java. So the answer for this question is as follows. Basically, access specifiers are predefined keywords used to help a Java virtual machine to understand the scope of a particular data member or data manipulating method within a class or outside the class. So in Java, we have 4 types of access specifiers. The first one is public access specifier. So when you declare a data member or a data manipulating method as public, then that particular data member or method can be accessible by any class or object throughout the package. Followed by that, we have the private access specifier. So unlike the public access specifier, when you provide the private access specifier, then the accessibility of that particular private data member or the data manipulating method will be provided to specific classes and specific objects only. And finally, we have the protected access specifier. So the protected access specifier is a bit more secure than the private access specifier. So the access for this particular protected data member or protected data manipulating method could be a little more difficult to access unless you are going to implement everything which is present in that particular package. So basically, if you are trying to access the protected data member or protected data manipulating method of a different package, then you need to first import the package into your existing package. So that's how the protected access specifier works practically. So finally, after the major 3 access specifiers, we have the default access specifier. So default access specifier will be provided by the Java virtual machine. So in case if you declare a variable or a data manipulating method without using any specific access specifiers that are public, private and protected, then JVM implicitly considers the default access specifier. So there is no much of a difference between the public access specifier and the default access specifier. Both have the same functionality and accessibility. So followed by this question, we enter into the next question, that is, can a constructor return a value? So the answer for this question is as follows. Yes, a constructor can return a value. It basically returns the current instance of a class implicitly. You cannot make a constructor return a value explicitly, but automatically it returns the instance of a class. So the next question is, explain this keyword in Java. So in Java, we do have a keyword which is called as this. So what does the keyword this mean in Java is the question. So the answer for this question is, the term this is a special keyword designated as a reference variable. So the term this keyword is used to refer to the current class properties like data manipulating method, instance, data member, and constructors. So followed by the 24th question, we have our next question that says, explain super keyword in Java. So the answer for this question is as follows. The term super is a special keyword designated as a reference variable. So similar to this keyword, even super keyword acts as a reference variable. But the difference is super keyword is used to refer to the immediate parent class object. So followed by the 25th question, we have our next question, that is, explain method overloading in Java. So basically, method overloading and method overriding, etc. are the concepts of polymorphism. So now let's have a correct answer here. So the process of creating multiple method signatures using one method name is called as method overloading. So for example, consider that you wanted to include an addition operation in your program that performs addition operation. So the first method will be having the name add, and inside the method parameters, you'll be having two integer types of parameters. Similarly, you wanted to perform another addition operation with the same name, add. So here you will provide the method name completely same to the first method, but inside the parameters there is a difference. You are adding 3 parameters here. So when you pass the values to the add method, then which method to be overloaded? That's the confusion, right? So should I overload, or should I execute the first add method or the second add method? So this completely depends on the number of parameters you pass. If you are passing 2 parameters, then the first method will be executed. If you are passing 3 parameters, then the second method will be executed. So this is how the method overloading happens in Java. So the process of method overloading can be achieved by using 2 different ways. The first way is to change the number of arguments. So that's what exactly I've discussed before. Now the second way is varying the return type of the method. So with this, let's enter into the next question. Can we overload a static method? So as discussed before, the values of the variables or data manipulating methods will not be changed when we have used the keyword static in front of it. So the question is, can we overload a static method? Now let's discuss the answer for this. The answer is no. Java does not support overloading of static method. The process would throw an error reading static method cannot be referenced. So followed by this, we have our next question. So the next question is, define late binding. The answer for this question is, binding is a process of unifying the method call with the method's code segment. Late binding happens when the method's code segment is unknown till the method is called during the runtime. So followed by this, we have our next question. Define dynamic method dispatch. So the answer is, the dynamic method dispatch is a process where the method call is executed during the runtime. The overridden method is called through a reference variable of superclass. So this process is called as runtime polymorphism. Now we have our next question. Why is delete function faster in linked list than an array? So basically, linked list and array are the Java collections, or in other words, it's also considered as data structure. So to answer this question, you need to understand the analogy of linked list and array. So basically, an array is a complete memory block of consecutive memory locations. So consider that your memory location starts from 100 and your array has 10 locations. So it's a complete reserved block of from 100, 101, 102 to 109. So you have 10 memory blocks. So in case if you wanted to add a number or delete a number, then you had to make changes to the complete memory block. But when you come into linked list, you have the memory blocks used from the memory heap. So basically what you do here is you basically connect the nodes through addresses. So in case if you wanted to eliminate a number, then what you do is just to manipulate the addresses. So the address of the consecutive node will be changed. So that's the only change what you make. So now this is the reason why the delete function or any kind of manipulation function is faster in linked list compared to array. So now let's have a brief answer on this. Delete function is faster in linked list as the user needs to make a minor update to the pointer value so that the node can point to the next successor in the list. Now followed by this, we have our next question. Give a briefing on the life cycle of a thread. So the life cycle of a thread includes 5 stages, which are as mentioned below. Newly born state, runnable state, that is, it provides the JVM with a feedback that I'm ready to run now, followed by that the running stage where the thread is actually running, followed by that the block stage. So basically the thread will be blocked for some reasons, for some intermediate output or something, if the thread is waiting for an input from another source or something similar. So that's where the blocked state comes to existence. And finally, the dead state. Once after everything is processed, the thread is eliminated by JVM. Now followed by this, we have our next question that says, explain the differences between the operators provided here. So the operators might look similar, but they are different. Now let's understand about these operators in a much better way through the answer. So the answer for this question is, although they look similar, but there's a huge difference between them. So the first operator, which looks like two greater than symbols, perform the operation of right shifting. So when you provide a binary number or binary value, then the bits will be shifted towards the right. And the second symbol or the second operator, which is having three greater than symbols, is used to shift out the zero filled bits. So this is the functionality of these two operators. Now followed by that, let's have the 33rd question. Brief the life cycle of an applet. So the answer for this question is, the life cycle of an applet basically involves the following stages. The first stage is the initialization stage, next is the start stage, third is the stop stage, fourth is destroy, and finally we have paint. Now the next question is, why are generics used in Java? So the answer for this question is, compile time type safety is provided by using generics in Java. So this approach allows the users to catch unnecessary invalid inputs at the time of compilation. Generic methods and classes help programmers to specify a single method declaration, a set of related methods, or with a single class declaration, a set of related types. So followed by this, we have our next question. Explain externalizable interface. So the answer for this question is, the externalizable interface helps with the control over the process of serialization. The externalization interface incorporates read external and write external methods. So we have listened to a new term here, which is serialization. So what exactly is serialization? Serialization is a process of sending your Java code or Java project from one computer system to a different computer system. So basically, if you wanted to execute some kind of Java program from a different location, then you serialize this particular code to a different location where you actually want to execute, and this particular process of transferring your code is called as serialization. Now the next question is, explain daemon thread. So the answer for this question is, the daemon thread can be defined as a thread with least responsibility. The daemon thread is designed to run in a background during the process of garbage collection in Java. The setDaemon method is used to create the daemon thread in Java programming language. So we have our next question now. Explain the term enumeration in Java. So the answer for this question is, enumeration or enum is an interface in Java. Enum allows the sequential access of elements stored in a collection in Java. Now the next question is, why is Java considered as a dynamic programming language? So the answer for this question is, Java was designed to adapt to an evolving environment. Java programs include large amount of runtime information that is actually used to resolve access to the objects in real time. So this is the reason why Java is considered as dynamic programming language. Now followed by this, we have our next question. Can you run a code before executing the main method? So the answer for this question is, yes, we can execute any code even before the main method. We will be using the static block of code in the class when creating the objects at load time of the class. Any statements within the static block of the code will execute it once while loading the class, even before the creation of objects in the main method. Now the last question in the intermediate section is, how many times the finalize method is called? So the answer for this question is, the finalize method is called by the garbage collector. So for every object, the garbage collector calls the finalize method just for once. Now with this, let's enter the advanced segment of interview questions based on Java. So the first question in the advanced segment is, can the keywords this and super be used together? So the answer for this question is no. This and super keywords should be used in the first statement in the class constructor. So the following code segment will give you a better idea. So you can see that we have used the keyword super and this in the class constructor. That is the first class constructor. Now this is how you can use super keyword and this keyword together in case if you wanted to use. So with this, let's continue with the next question in the advanced level. So the next question says explain JSP page. So the answer for this question is JSP is basically an abbreviation for Java Servlet page. So the Java Servlet page consists of two types of text. The first is the static data and the second one is Java Servlet page elements. Now the next question is explain JDBC. So the answer is JDBC is an abbreviation for Java Database Connector. JDBC is an abstract layer used to establish connectivity between any existing database and to a Java application. Next question is explain the various directives of JSP. So the directives are instructions processed by JSP engine. After the JSP page is compiled into a servlet, directives are used to set page level instructions, insert data from external files and specify custom tag libraries. Directives are defined between the following symbols. So these are the symbols that are used to specify the directives in a JSP page. The different types of directives are shown as below. There are three types of directives. They are include directive, page directive, and taglib directive. So include directive includes a file and merges the content of the file with the current page. The page directive is used to define specific attributes in the JSP page like error page and buffer. The taglib directory is used to declare a custom tag library which is used in the JSP page. Followed by that we have the next question. What are observer and observable classes? So the answer for this question is objects that subclass the observable class maintain a list of observers. When an observable object is updated, it invokes the update method of each of the observers to notify that the observers that it has changed its state. The observer interface is implemented by objects that observe observable objects. Might be a little confusing, but you need to read this answer once again. You can pause it and you can read this answer once again so that you can get a brief understanding of this. Followed by that we have the next question. What is session management in Java? So the answer for this question is a session is essentially defined as the dynamic stage of a random conversation between the client and the server. The essential communication channel includes the string of responses and requests from both sides. Typically, the most popular way of implementing session management is the employment of a session ID in the communicative discourse of the client and the server. The next question is brief about Spring Framework. Spring Framework is basically the framework of frameworks. Now the answer for this question is Spring is essentially defined as the application framework and inversion of control container for Java. Basically, the chief purpose of Spring Framework is to create enterprise applications in Java. Also, it is especially useful to keep in mind that the central features of the Spring Framework are essentially conducive to any Java application. So the next question is explain JCA in Java. So the answer for this question is JCA is basically an abbreviation for Java Cryptography Architecture. So JCA provides a platform that gives architecture and APIs for encryption as well as decryption. JCA is used by the developer to combine the application with the security measure. It also helps in performing the third-party security rules. It uses the hash table, encryption message digest, etc. to implement the security. So the next question is explain JPA in Java. So the answer for this question is JPA stands as an abbreviation for Java Persistence API. The JPA is enabling us to create the persistence layer for desktop and web applications. JPA deals with the following: Java Persistence API, Query Language, Java Persistence Criteria API, Object Mapping Metadata, etc. So the last question in our list is, explain the different authentications in Java servlets. So the answer for this question is, authentication options available in servlets are as follows. The first one is basic authentication. So the basic authentication consists of username and password provided by the client to authenticate as the user. The second one is form-based authentication. In this particular type of authentication, the login form is made by the programmer by using HTML. Followed by that, we have the third type of authentication, that is digest authentication. Digest authentication is similar to basic authentication, but in this the passwords are encrypted using hash formula. This makes digest more secured. And lastly, we have the client certificate authentication. The client certificate authentication requires that each client accessing the resource has a certificate that it sends to authenticate itself. This requires SSL protocol.
Now with that, we have come to an end of the session on Java projects and Java interview questions. Hope this session was helpful, and if you have any queries regarding any of the topics covered in this session, or if you require the resources that we used in this session, then please feel free to let us know in the comment section below, and our team of experts will get back to you at the earliest and try to resolve all your queries as soon as possible. Until next time, thank you, stay safe, and keep learning.
Hi there, if you like this video, subscribe to the Simplilearn YouTube channel and click here to watch similar videos. To nerd up and get certified, click here.